I would encourage you, just like with the planning, think a year ahead, and you yourself as the director go to the event so you can get a feel for it and see, the scope of it, how different it'll be. It's a big difference between walking into the Alamo Dome or Lucas Oil Stadium than there is at the local high school stadium with the 10-row bleacher kind of thing. So if you're going to go to that big contest, it's really good for you just to be there and just feel the difference in the energy. What's it like? So start a year before, do the recon. And I would take some people with you. One of the things that can help is as when you're thinking about affecting some change in personnel, for instance, is to have the people that are on the staff already. And if you're going to bring in a different design person or design team or somebody new, in the writing side of any of this, is to ask them some questions, just like I was talking about with the kids. But the way we ask it is important. You have to be really careful and strategic. Use starting prompts like, "Have we ever considered bringing somebody from the outside in?" And then you'll get yes, no, kind of things. Well, if it's no, just say, "And why is that?"
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Marching Roundtable podcast. We are talking about figuring out your marching band show concept, and we have somebody really smart to help us talk about it today. John Phillips is here. John, how are you?
I'm great, Tim. Fighting off a bit of a cold, but I think I got enough voice to get through this today.
I appreciate you coming here and doing this today. And we are, of course, sponsored by LCL Mentors, Leaders Creating Leaders, doing great work mentoring directors and educators out there in the world in all kinds of different ways. So thank you to Leaders Creating Leaders for sponsoring this. So John, you are the judge administrator for Drum Corps International, the chief judge for Bands of America. So I feel like you are the perfect person to talk about how to select the right show concept for your band, because you have seen so many shows. I mean, am I not right? Like, you have seen a lot of shows.
I was reflecting on that when we were getting ready for this, and I've seen everything, not only here in America, but around the world. I've been fortunate to travel to South America, South Asia, Asia, Europe, and see, basically an array of approaches to creating this whole marching arts concept. So it's been an interesting journey for me, and I'm fortunate to have had those opportunities.
Absolutely. So I think that choosing the right concept for this group, this year, at this moment in time, that is always the trick. And we are decided to sort of narrow their topic down a little bit by talking about 3 different specific scenarios for choosing your show concept. First, we're going to talk about a special consideration for small bands as they select their show concept, their music, their theme, that kind of thing. Then we're going to talk about bands that are headed to a big contest for the first time, like maybe going to a Bands of America Regional, Grand Nationals, any kind of big state contest maybe for the first time. They're moving things up to another level. There are special considerations there. And then we're also going to talk about bands that might have a new director, a switch of staff. There are special considerations there. So John, let's talk about, you have a small band and you're trying to choose the right concept. What comes to mind first from you?
Well, the key thing is focus, creating a focus on your group. You will probably be amidst, in a bigger contest, which we'll talk about later, amidst groups that are twice, 3, 4, 5 times the size of your ensemble, your band. And therefore, you have to understand that you can't play as loud as they are. You can't fill the stage as much as they can. And the key thing is to create a focus for your band. One of the things that, as I was saying in the beginning, Tim, that I've been fortunate to travel around the world, and I've worked with some organizations such as the World Association of Marching Show Bands. With Drum Corps International, we have the Sound Sport program. I've been to Japan, and they use a smaller stage. So even though you're out on a football field, I think the real key for your group, and we're probably going to say a lot of things to people today, Tim, that they've already heard before, either in a clinic or a workshop or someplace. But if that underscores that point with you, if that resonates with you, then maybe this is the time to start thinking about that. How am I going to stage my group so that people are going to pay attention to them and not what's going on in the end zone?
Right. And of course, there are many discussions about how to make your stage smaller with backdrops and tarps and all kinds of props and set pieces and things. And so there are many have been discussions about that. But I do think that a small band needs to think, what can we do? How can we create effect? What are we good at? What's our thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I work with the Archbishop Alter High School Band out of Ohio, who's had a lot of success at Grand Nationals. And I mean, they have sometimes 12, 14, 16 musicians besides percussion. So a small wind band. So we have to really think about, well, how are we going to make music with this number of players, and what are they good at, and what is our style? And I think you really have to think about that. You're not going to be doing 1812, with a small band. We've all heard that's very obvious, but still directors miss it. They don't think about, well, am I a chamber ensemble? Can we play Mozart, or are we a small jazz ensemble, or like what are we?
Yeah, and the music choice for absolutely. I mean, it's probably not wise to pick a big cinematic piece or a huge symphony or something like Tchaikovsky that the resources just aren't there. But you make a really good point, and I've seen that Archbishop Alter group before. Every one of those players in the wind section is mic'd, so we're hearing them very clearly, and they sound great because they've had excellent teaching. There's no shortcut there. Just because you have a small band doesn't mean that you can't play well. In fact, in the concert world, I've adjudicated a number of festivals where, a smaller group comes out and they're really great. They're very expressive. They've been taught really well. So, we understand that with bands at any size, you cannot take a shortcut to excellence. You have to take the time and teach them properly so that they're going to sound great no matter what music you choose.
Right. And I've had conversations that are out there everybody can find at the Marching Roundtable and at marchingartseducation.com about how a band like Alter uses their percussion ensemble to create really a whole rhythm section. And they have drums and guitar and the whole thing. And so they have all this accompaniment for the wind players who are playing the melodies and the main themes. So there's lots of ways to play this, but we spend a lot of time with that group, for example, trying to figure out what's the show concept and what music can we play, because it's a very specific thing. So I think if you have a small band and you're trying to figure out what to do, you really need to figure out how can we create effect with the small amount of space and performers that we have. You can create a lot of effect and excitement with a small group, but you do have to choose the right things.
Absolutely. And, when you talk about the percussion, that's really one of the critical parts of it, because that's the motor. That's what keeps the energy of the performance happening pretty much throughout. However, there's probably some times where you don't need the percussion, especially with small bands. Maybe we just need to hear the winds. It's, in the whole musical design idea, one thing with percussion, where do you stage them? Do you have them out on the back? Do you have them in the middle of the field and the group moves and marches around that? Or do you have them up front? And regardless of where you have them, the balance of the percussion, the number of players. I've seen small bands with more percussion instruments than wind players, and that can work actually. But you have to really be sensitive to the balance. I think one thing that happens with directors, they hear the original source material, they hear the arrangement that's been created for them, MIDI file, or if they use Note Performer, they can hear actually what it's going to sound like. It's kind of, that's the what's that? The marching software. Just lost it there for a second. The Pieware. It's like the music version of Pieware. You can see the finished, you can hear the finished product. So that's great. You've got that in your ear, but that's maybe not actually what's happening out there. And that's where, as judges, sometimes we go, well, why did they choose that balance, or where is the melody gone? So keep that in mind. Get a second opinion in terms of have somebody come in and say, and I know that you guys have done that with Alter, to get that feedback, to kind of find that right mix and match of sounds and movement. But getting back to the percussion, it doesn't matter. There are some key instruments that I would encourage small band people to go for and to make sure you have. Is some kind of a bass drum, some kind of a deeper sound, because that bass is one of the voices that's typically missing in the small bands. Make sure that if you have a keyboard instrument, try to get something that's got a little bit more middle or lower uh, frequency happening. Like a marimba is ideal if you can afford it. And of course, use maybe synthesizers, a very effective instrument to have in that front ensemble. Use cymbals judiciously, but definitely have some cymbals to fill in some of the spaces and wet things up a little bit. And be really careful about how you tune the snare. One of the things I hear with small bands a lot is they'll put marching percussion in the concert setting, in the grounded percussion group. And it's very tightly tuned, and it's very, very sharp and percussive. And it really doesn't mix with the few wind resources that you have. So careful tuning of the percussion more on the concert side is really the way to go. We kind of went down a rabbit hole there with percussion, but when you mentioned the rhythm section with alter, that certainly suits the styles that they've chosen over these last couple of years. And of course, they've had an all-star lead performer, whether the kid was playing piano or saxophone or harmonica. It's been incredible. And if you have that as one of your key resources, if you've got a superstar, even if they're not in the marching band program, a singer or some kid who's really talented on piano, try to get them involved. They don't have to march. They can sit down and play the piano or walk to the microphone and sing. And that could really be entertaining, as you were talking about before, with the effect.
Actually, I think that you have gotten to what I think is the main point. You got right there, John. I think it's just brilliant. Is because I think small bands, especially, this is true for all bands, but small bands especially, you have to highlight whatever you've got. What is special, right? Who do you have? I've written a whole show around an all-state trumpet kid. At Alter, we wrote a whole show around a fantastic guitarist, right? It's like, who do you have? And listen, I would say some band directors, there are things that your students can do that you don't know. So I always tell all bands, but especially small bands, do an inventory, find out, there's a flute player that has 6 years of dance training. I didn't know that. That's going in the show. We can write a whole show around her. The flute that turns into a ballet dancer. That's a show concept. So figure out you have a kid that can juggle. You have a kid that can sing. Whatever they can do is especially important for small bands. And then really, John, you need that one idea, right? You have that one special thing that you're going to highlight. Just build the show around that. Keep it simple.
Yeah. I mean, your theme should be obvious, when you do this to the evaluators. If you're going into competition or even if it's just the Friday night lights, how entertaining are you for your audience? You want them, there's a lot of places around this country where the football stadium's filled, not because of the team, but because of the band,
Yeah.
So that would be a really great thing, regardless of the size of your band to have. And the last thing I want to just really underscore before we leave this side of the discussion is, Tim, and I mentioned this briefly before, is there's no shortcut to excellence. You have to work incrementally, right from the get-go, even before you get the band out to their first camp. Know the year before. Kind of look at what's the incoming class going to look like. Are you spending time with your middle schools before? If we're talking to high school directors here, are you looking at the talent level so you'll know how to plan accordingly? There's that adage, failure to plan is a plan for. And if we don't start soon, if you haven't started already, March 1st is coming up. It's the time, right, to get ready and just to know what kind of resources you're going to work with, have available. What are you going to put together a music fundamental program that the students can actually start working on before you even get to band camp, So now is the time to be thinking about that. As your concert season's wrapping up, you immediately roll it into marching season and get ready.
Yeah, I love that. I tell everybody, plan earlier than you ever have before. The great groups that I work with are already thinking about next year's show during this year's season, and they're certainly not waiting until April or May to figure out what their show's going to be and start to make plans. So plan earlier, always plan earlier. That's a huge help. So that's going to be important for a group that's headed to a big contest for the first time.
Yeah.
They definitely need to planning ahead. So you've seen a lot of groups show up at big regionals, grand nationals, big state contests, whatever their next level is. What is the first piece of advice you would want them to know about taking that step?
Yeah, if you've only been competing in a local circuit or at invitationals, going to your neighborhood school district and performing and competing in their invitational once or twice a year, or hold one yourself, and you decide, well, we're going to go to state contests this year, or we're going to go to one of the branded regionals, whether it's BOA or U.S. bands, kind of regional. Um, I would encourage you, just like with the planning, think a year ahead, and you yourself, as the director, go to the event so you can get a feel for it and see, the scope of it, how different it'll be. It's a big difference between walking into the Alamo Dome or Lucas Oil Stadium than there is at the local high school stadium with the 10-row bleacher kind of thing. So if you're going to go to that big contest, it's really good for you just to be there and just feel the difference in the energy. What's it like? So start a year before, do the recon. And I would take some people with you, use it as a leadership opportunity. Maybe take some of the drum majors who might be continuing on with the band in the next year, or the current drum majors. But take a parent or two so that they understand that they can see these other bands and go, wow, we could do that, and if you can't afford to do that, or you haven't the resources to do that, then ask people who have, that are in your vicinity, about their experience and what did they expect. I know that Bands of America, for people who are going to attend Grand Nationals specifically, will do a walkthrough. They'll give them a orientation to the entire event, because it's a big thing, and it doesn't just involve. In some cases, you've got travel involved. You've got to take care of meals and housing, all these things if you're going to go in that direction. So it's a real good thing to kind of know what you're getting into before you just all of a sudden the bus door opens and you go, wow, where do we go?
Yeah, and I think talking to people, all of that's great. That is such great advice. Everybody, you need to do that for sure. And I think talking to people also about their experience, sometimes there are different metrics for the way scoring works. And so, if you're used to getting a 92 at your local program, you might end up with an 82 in a big regional. And that doesn't mean that your band is any less. It just has to do with the rubric and the way things are scored. And that's something else that I think sometimes people misunderstand. You need to set up your whole band family, your students and your band family, to understand that part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, in adjudication, it's called a paradigm, right? There's a paradigm changes depending on your regionality, so to speak. So in your local circuit, the best band there might well score in the 90s, but they may not do that on a national level, and that's because when judges are evaluating, they're comparing all of the bands. So the difference between I think last year there was 104. 110 bands at the BOA Grand Nationals. That's a lot to compare, as opposed to a local circuit where there might be 5 or 6 groups, or 10 or 15. But still, in that comparison, the scoring range is much more dramatic. So, yeah, I think you make a really good point about understanding the paradigm for different organizations. And it's not just about Bands of America. The UIL system in Texas is really quite different, very comprehensive in how it's scored. And they work just on ordinals, in terms of placement. You have to qualify even to go to their championships. So, if you're going to the big contest, being prepared, understanding what you're getting into is really critical.
Yeah, and then one of the things I always think about when I think about these groups going to a big contest for the first time is, I feel like, don't try to do too much, right? Like, you've seen, okay, well, here's what these top groups are doing, but I have to have a plan, a multi-year plan. And it just showing up and having the right kind of show is a giant step. So this might not be the year to add 20 new set pieces and trapezes and fireworks. Like, this is, you know what I mean? Like, I think smartly. What are we good at? What do we want to highlight? And let's take that first step and make sure it's smart.
And after you understand what you're getting into and you make the decision, you send in your application, then it's time to really prepare your students accordingly as well. If you've took some photos or video, or you've got samples of groups that have performed in these venues, if it's a different kind of venue for you, it's time to sit down with them and start to prepare them both, just like we just talked about with small bands, to make sure that your pursuit of excellence, but also to prepare them mentally, so emotionally, for what they're going to experience. They'll see the best groups in the country. That'll be if it's at a national level and in the state, depending on where you're going to take them to that. We're calling it the big contest for the first time. If you're a non-competitive band and you choose to dip your toe into the competitive realm, be realistic. Understand that, someone's going to come first, someone's going to come second, and all the way down the line. Your goal setting should be realistic. If you're saying, well, we're going into competition for the first time ever, we've been a parade band, we've just done some great tours, and we're an excellent band. And now we know we're good, so we're going to go and we're going to compete. Well, if you haven't done that before, there might be some things that you haven't taken into consideration. Tim brought up the point of knowing the paradigm and understanding the judging system that you'll be experiencing. So just make sure that everybody's on board with that. Make sure the parents understand that too. Like sometimes the parents have got great ambitions, bigger than what the director does, So you have to kind of tame that a little bit as well.
Right. That's why I always say talk to and prepare your entire band family, your community, your administration. Everybody needs to understand this sort of new world that you're stepping into. And the other thing I love that you mentioned was getting the parents excited and having them have that experience. If you're going to go for this year to plan for next year, you do need to let those parents see also your top leaders, if not your whole band. I mean, let's schlep everybody over there and watch the show if you can. But parents can get very excited. They have to understand the world that you are trying to step into, and they can get very excited, John. Like I know a lot of people who they take their color guard to WGI in Dayton for the first time, and the parents all of a sudden are like, oh, like I see what everybody's doing. I see how the shows are put together. I see that and they suddenly understand, right? So you mentioned showing them videos and things, but try to get those parents excited to understand what you're trying to do as well. If you're excited about it, they'll get excited about it, but they need to understand what you're trying to do.
And they'll be more accepting of the maybe a bit more intense rehearsal schedule that you set, maybe an extra day or two on the band camp, band week and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's important. I want to stress something on the back end of this as well, Tim, that once you've had the experience and you've gone for the first time, I really believe that, and during this as well, one of the most important things you can do is make sure you engage the kids in reflecting on their experience. You need to have some kind of a debrief and ask them questions that, first of all, are kind of innocent enough that make them feel comfortable. Like, well, which group did you see that you thought did really well, and why do you think that? Get them reflecting on why that group may have been in the top echelon of the bands. And then ask them, well, how did we do? What was the best thing we did? I always start with a positive. Like, what's the best thing we did in our performance here at this big show this year? And then what could we have done better? Getting them to reflect gives them some ownership in all of this in a cognitive way, makes them think about it, right? As opposed to, oh yeah, well, it was okay. No, if given an out, any adolescent is going to do that, find the easy answer. But if you frame the questions properly, and it can even be an online survey. I mean, with the technology we have now, who's going to sit down and write it on a piece of paper, right? So you could create on a Google, one of those polling things really quickly, have them fill that out. That'll be good information for you and inform your next steps for when you go the next time to one of these things.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And the other thing too that all the top educators that I know do is that they frame success based on how did we do and how did we grow and how was our performance, right? So rather than how did we do necessarily compared to everybody else, but hey, did we do the best we could do today? Did we grow this season as a group? Are we moving toward our goals? That way, it's not all about competitive success or numbers, but it's more about, well, where did our program go this year? And how much did we grow? And what did we get out of this? Are we headed somewhere exciting for where we want our program to go into the future? I think if you frame it that way, it's much healthier competitively, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I love it. So then our third topic was bands that have a new director. I have a very simple suggestion here, but I'm sure that you do too. If you're a new director or you have a band with a new director coming in or a new staff change, what would you tell them, John?
Don't try to change everything overnight.
Exactly. That is the big mistake people make. Tell me more about that. That's exactly what I had in mind.
Well, a good example, I'm not going to name this director or this band, but I observed this a couple of years ago. I was in a state in the South somewhere, Texas, and this was a new director and had a pretty solid program, but they were perennially, they would, if their state contest would come second, third, fourth, somewhere in that range. They never really won this. But in the first year, this director took time to get to know what were the traditions, what are the things that are now. It didn't hurt that they went to school there, so they kind of understood it, but it came full circle, ended up teaching back at a school that they'd gone to. But they didn't change the staff right away. They didn't change even the design team. They maintained a lot of traditions, but what they did do was like embraced a lot of those things and then just teased in a few different new ideas. And we're satisfied in the first year, worked toward excellence. The marching band did reasonably well at state contests, did not win. But guess what happened in the second year? They won. And that was because those changes were very incremental and very strategic. And over time, there was no alienation of the existing staff, no alienation of the parents or the leadership within the kids themselves. I think new directors, you have to understand there's when you walk into a new situation, especially if the school's been reasonably successful in competitions or in just performance standards, there's a lot of loyalty to that director who's leaving. And one of the hardest things is going in when somebody's retiring. That's always difficult because there could be a legacy there of 20, 25, 30 years. Imagine, walking into a school where somebody's been there for 25 years and they've got trophies all around the room and, flags and pennants and all kinds of things. I mean, that's a tough replacement situation. So anyway, not changing things right away, doing it in a very strategic, methodical way, and consulting with those who you're going to be making the changes with is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say don't change anything. But I think to your point, it's like, okay, be strategic. Think about, okay, is there some tiny little moment, a bit of the culture, I want us to change the way we do this one little thing. But going in and trying to change too much is very difficult. I think especially, John, because directors launch with the marching band, right? And so you just don't want to upset the apple cart. Even if things haven't been going really well with the school that you're stepping into, then what you're going to do is simply keep the boat floating along, and then all of a sudden you're upping the performance level so the band sounds better on Friday night. That can make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where through the entire fall term, until the concert or marching season was over, they didn't sit down and do concert music. And I'm a big proponent of doing the concert music, having classes working on those concert fundamentals and creating the best sound. However, that change was going to come, but it wasn't going to, if you try to do that in the first year, that's really going to change the whole dynamic. And we talk about paradigms. I mean, that's really going to be quite dramatic. But
Right. So,
yeah,
and
go
since
ahead.
our main focus here is on the show concept, I would tell a new director, you may well inherit a show and just like make it work, right? Like figure it out, maybe tweak it slightly if you need to. But you're not going to be able to come in and do a completely different kind of show concept with a program that's never had it. You need to win those students and band family and parents and everybody over, and then start to implement where you want to go over time. Sort of same thing. That I would not come in and suddenly do some crazy avant-garde show concept. You're just going to alienate everybody, and you're not going to win those kids over. And particularly if you've inherited something.
Totally. One of the things that can help is as when you're thinking about affecting some change in personnel, for instance, is to have the people that are on the staff already. And if you're going to bring in a different design person or design team or somebody new, on the writing side of any of this, is to ask them some questions, just like I was talking about with the kids. But the way we ask it is important. to be really careful and strategic. Use starting prompts like, have we ever considered bringing somebody from the outside in? And then you'll get yes, no kinds of things. Well, if it's no, just say, and why is that? Kind of, I call it socially engineering, getting the existing team to think that this is their idea, that you're going to do this. Or what do you think about this? So you're showing that you want to hear their opinion. And I'm not encouraging you to be disingenuous and not care what they give you as a response. You've got an impression of where you want it to go, but ask them like, yeah, what do you think about this? Or who would you recommend if we were going to bring in somebody to, be our visual designer or our new percussion head? What would we do? Engage them in that process so it doesn't appear to be autocratic, like a unilateral decision just by the director themselves.
Yeah, and as you sort of mentioned, as someone who does show design and works with band directors and their staff all the time, the holy grail for me is for them to think it was their idea. And I don't care whose idea it was. I just think it's a good idea. And I love it when we have the discussion in such a way that you just described, that through exploring as a group, we come to somewhere really wonderful and they feel like they have that ownership. That is the best case scenario for me. And you want to do that if you're a new director, with your team, with your students, with your parents. You want to have, I think it's great. You talked about the way of prompting the questions and asking and getting them to engage and share where they are. It's quite possible that they are going to be on the same page and they can lead the conversation from them rather than it having to come from you. That's great advice.
Yeah. We're talking about a new director, and without making the assumption that new director is experienced, I think I don't want to take it too far aside, but I thought, well, what about being a new director and a new teacher? This is like one of your first or second or third assignments, like you're just getting started. Just a couple of quick things, Tim, I think that can help with all of this, because I do know that there are directors out there who are, I've met them, they just came out of their college experience and then all of a sudden they're the band director at a school. So a couple things to keep in mind, and this is in all deference to the music education programs across the country, but in the ones that I've taught at, I always tell my pre-service candidates that, folks, no matter how much you think you've assimilated from this experience with me, and it'd be no offense, know that you haven't got enough to make you successful yet in your experience. So you've got to continue your learning. For new directors, you've got to continue to be a sponge and absorb as much as you can. You can do that through things like attending Music Education Association conferences. They're often in the fall, or things like the Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic in Chicago just before Christmas, or the Texas Music Educators Association. Those are some of the biggest ones. Make sure you find your posse, like who are the other directors in your district or in the surrounding districts that you are aware of. Ask to go and see one of their rehearsals. If there's a Music Teachers Association in your school district, be sure to be part of that. Get involved in a network, join the Music Educators Association, and get that professional ongoing learning that's so important. We're fortunate now, so, COVID really drove this, but, there's so much online material that's available. If you're doing marching band, the marching band resources online are great. I know, Tim, that you host one of those sources that Wayne Markworth put together. I use that with my marching band techniques class. And then there's dynamic marching. There's a whole bunch of UDBs coming out with a whole bunch of things, that Stride program. So there's just a lot of online resources that's only going to add to where you got your initial start in your pre-service program at the college. But know that you just can't do it alone. And that's so critical for that brand new director.
Yeah, and I think that you actually ended up right at the most important thing that we could say at all, which is that you need to have mentors and associates and other directors and friends and people in the activity that you can talk to and get support from and throw ideas off of. And John, I would say that for any of these different groups of people that we've just been talking about trying to figure out their show concept, perhaps the most important thing I would suggest is ask somebody what they think about your idea. In other words, have somebody or a bunch of different people you can call them. I'm thinking about doing this show concept with my band. What do you think? Because so many times, if you're in the weeds of it, you and even your associates in your team at your school will think it's something really great. You need to check that out. You need to have somebody that will give you a straight answer, tell you how it really is, and say, well, you might want to think about this wrinkle on that, like how might your community, where you're located, or, well, I tried to do that concept back in 1984. And let me tell you why that's a terrible idea. Like, I just think you mentioned having those people that are supporting you, that you can ask questions to, that you can get feedback from. I feel like no matter who you are, if you've been a director at a very successful school for 100 years, you still need to have somebody that on speed dial that you can go, okay, we're thinking about this. What do you think?
And in essence, that's what you're doing when you put it out there for competition, right? You're asking the judges, well, what do you think? And
Exactly.
they were not part of that creative process or that design process, so they don't have any inside information there. You got to be clear. You got to make sure, going all the way back to the beginning, right, where we started today. When you're choosing this, make sure it's clear, it's obvious, it's attainable. All of those things are so critical, because you're going to be presenting that to some people who only maybe get to look at it one time and then give you some kind of a rating or ranking how that looks and appears to them. And they've got no skin in the game. They're being as unbiased as they can. So asking that question before you get to that event is really very helpful. Great point.
Yeah. And I would encourage you to ask that question really early in the planning design process. Get some feedback early on about, well, we're thinking about this and we're really into it and excited about it, but let me check this with a couple people that I really trust and make sure that there's not some landmine or angle or wrinkle on this that I'm missing. Because believe me, I have done this before, and usually the idea needed to be simplified. Almost always it needed to be simplified, made clearer, made the idea smaller, because you only got 7 minutes usually around to really make your point and sell and make this clear.
We're fortunate in the marching arts, Tim, that if there's anyone listening in here today that is in those initial stages or just taking on a new job somewhere, you really don't need to be afraid to ask. No one is going to, we know so many generous people. I'm not trying to give you more phone calls or emails, Tim, but they could ask you. I know you respond. I would.
Sure.
Our colleagues in this realm, we're better. And I can tell you, in the drum corps, we're better when everyone is successful. The more people are successful, the better the activity. And if we want the marching arts to thrive and stay alive, people at the very top of their game are going to be willing to give you some information, or at least to listen to your idea and give you some feedback. So don't be shy about it.
Yeah, I love it when I get an email from somebody saying, hey, I've got a small band and I'm trying to do this and I need some advice. And not only might I have something to suggest, but I can point them to people in the same situation that I know that have had to do that, and they can get some direct feedback. So yes, ask me, ask anybody, but have that communication. John, I think that may be the most important thing that you landed right there at the end of this whole thing, is having your team, having your mentors, whether that's somebody at LCL Mentors that you contact, which is the sponsor of this message, of this whole podcast, but there's people out there willing to help you figure out how to solve your problems, make the right choices, and making the right choice for your music and your show concept is a really big deal. So don't be afraid, as you said, John, don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning LCL Mentors. We've done some projects with school districts. We've done them individually. We've done some camps. And, I appreciate the shout out to the team, because it's a great group of people, and it's quite a diverse group of individuals. We've got collegiate athletic band directors, all the way down to middle school directors and choir people. So our team is ready to help out if ever needed.
Yeah, that's a great resource available. If you don't know exactly who to call, maybe go to leaderscreating.com and call them and just get somebody to give you some feedback and some help and some support. John, this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank you for continuing to do the great work you do out there as judge administrator and head judge in so many different ways, and continuing educating directors, adjudicators, everybody, thank you for your hard work.
Always a pleasure, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.